The Galactic Council's chambers were unlike anything humans had ever seen. It was a space station, so vast that its walls seemed to stretch into eternity. Towering crystalline structures reflected the light of countless stars outside, making the entire room shimmer in shades of blue and silver. Dozens of alien delegates had gathered, representing species humans had only read about in scientific reports or seen in fleeting glimpses through telescopes. Some were small and delicate, almost floating in the air, while others were enormous, their massive forms barely fitting within the room. Yet despite their differences, they shared one thing: the authority of the Galactic Council, a body that had for centuries guided, controlled, and regulated interstellar affairs. For years, humanity had been part of this council indirectly, through a small delegation that represented Earth's interests. Humans had been cautious, learning to negotiate, to show respect, and to avoid stepping on the toes of far older civilizations. It had not been easy. Humans were known for their curiosity, innovation, and a tendency to act on instinct rather than protocol. And while the Council often tolerated these traits, it was clear now that something had changed. A human delegation waited anxiously in a secure viewing chamber, their eyes glued to the enormous holographic screen in front of them. They could see the Council's representatives seated in a semicircle, their voices and movements coordinated in a way that made the room feel almost alive. The air seemed charged, heavy with tension. A murmur passed through the human group, a mixture of awe and unease. They had attended meetings before, but nothing like this. This time, the mood was different. There was no friendliness, no patience in the way the Council's leader moved. The leader of the Council, a being of shimmering silver light that constantly shifted shape, spoke. Its voice was deep but calm, echoing in the vast chamber. "Earth," it said, "you have been given many opportunities. You have been warned and advised. Yet your actions continue to disrupt the balance of our galaxy. You have expanded your technology too quickly, interfered in matters that do not concern you, and ignored the protocols that bind all civilizations together. This Council issues its final warning. Comply with our rules, or face consequences that will affect your planet and your species forever." The words struck the humans like a cold wind. The room was silent for a moment, the only sound the faint hum of energy fields keeping the chamber intact. The delegation could feel the weight of the warning, the absolute seriousness in the tone. For centuries, the Council's warnings had carried weight, and disobedience had led to consequences that humans could barely imagine. There had been whispers of planets being cut off from interstellar communication, colonies being quarantined, and in rare cases, worlds destroyed. The humans knew this was not a threat to take lightly. Yet, as the words sank in, something unexpected began to stir within the delegation. It was not fear. It was a quiet determination. Humans had survived countless challenges on their own planet: conflicts, disasters, epidemics, and wars. They had faced threats that seemed insurmountable, yet they had endured. And now, standing on the edge of the galaxy, they realized that this was another test, not just of their strength, but of their courage, their wisdom, and their willingness to defend what they had built. Back on Earth, the reaction was mixed. News of the Council's warning spread quickly, transmitted through secure channels to leaders in every country. Citizens watched the broadcasts with bated breath. Some were terrified, imagining alien fleets poised to strike. Others were angry, feeling that humans were being unfairly judged by beings who did not understand their struggles. Scientists and engineers gathered in labs, analyzing the Council's statements, trying to find weaknesses or loopholes. Diplomats debated, scribbling notes and consulting interstellar laws, searching for a way to respond that would not provoke further hostility. And ordinary people, just living their daily lives, whispered to each other about what the warning meant for their children, their homes, and their future. The human delegation knew that the Council's message was designed to intimidate. It was meant to show that Earth was small, fragile, and easily controlled in the vastness of space. But humans were not like other species. They had a stubbornness that sometimes seemed reckless, a loyalty to each other that defied reason, and a capacity for adaptation that few could match. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, humans had a tendency to survive, and sometimes to thrive, in ways that surprised even themselves. As the delegation watched the Council, they noticed subtle gestures, tiny signals that hinted at internal disagreements among the alien species. Not all were in full agreement. Some seemed concerned, uneasy about the tone of the warning. Others appeared indifferent, as if they had already made up their minds about humanity's fate. These observations gave the humans a sliver of hope. Perhaps the Council was not as united as it seemed. Perhaps there were cracks they could exploit in their future negotiations. Despite the gravity of the situation, the humans did not panic. They began documenting everything, recording the Council's statements, noting the behavior of the delegates, and preparing their own reports. Every word mattered. Every gesture could provide insight into the Council's intentions. For humans, knowledge was power, and preparation was survival. They understood that reacting hastily could be disastrous. Instead, they chose patience, observation, and careful planning. After the meeting ended, the Council's representatives departed with the same imposing presence they had arrived with. The chamber slowly emptied, leaving the humans alone with their thoughts. There was tension, yes, but also resolve. They had faced many crises before, and this was just another. The delegation returned to their quarters, where they convened immediately to strategize. They discussed what the Council had said, analyzed every phrase, and debated possible responses. They knew that the coming days would be crucial, that their next steps could determine the future of their species in ways that no one could predict. In the quiet moments, away from the grandiosity of the Council, the human delegation reflected on what it meant to represent an entire planet. They were the voice of billions, the guardians of humanity's future. And for the first time, they realized the full weight of their responsibility. This warning from the Council was more than just a message. It was a challenge. How humanity would respond would not only define their relationship with the Council, but could also reshape the place of humans in the galaxy. Forever. The night fell over Earth as the news reached every corner of the planet. Families gathered around communication screens. Leaders held emergency meetings, and scientists worked tirelessly to interpret the Council's warning. But amid the fear and uncertainty, a quiet determination spread. Humanity had faced extinction-level threats before, and while the scale of the Council's warning was unprecedented, humans had a unique strength. They never gave up easily, and they never accepted control without resistance. For now, the first part of this story ended with humanity listening, observing, and preparing. They knew the warning was real, the consequences could be dire, and the galaxy was watching. But they also knew one thing with certainty. Humanity would face this challenge as it always had, together, intelligently, and without surrender. The story of this encounter was only beginning, and Earth's response, calm yet firm, would soon become a turning point that no one in the galaxy would forget. After the shock of the Council's warning, Earth's leaders realized they could not react blindly. The message from the Galactic Council had been precise, deliberate, and heavy with authority. But it had also raised more questions than it answered. Why had the Council suddenly shifted from cautious diplomacy to issuing a final warning? What had triggered this sudden urgency? Was humanity really a threat, or was there something else behind the stern message? The human delegation, along with scientists and analysts, began a detailed investigation to uncover the truth. In secure communication centers across the globe, data flowed in from satellites, space stations, and deep space probes. Every unusual signal, every anomaly detected in space over the past few decades, was being re-examined. Analysts noticed patterns they had previously overlooked: small interventions by unknown species, unexplained changes in interstellar traffic routes, and subtle manipulations in communication networks. The evidence suggested that the Council's warning was not purely about human behavior. It was influenced by pressure from specific factions within the Council itself. These factions seemed afraid of what humans might accomplish if left unchecked. Scientists and diplomats worked side by side, sharing discoveries in a way that had rarely been possible before. For decades, space exploration had been divided between governments, private organizations, and international coalitions. But now, faced with a potentially existential threat, humanity united like never before. Teams in different countries coordinated their research, translating alien languages, analyzing new technologies, and piecing together a picture of the forces arrayed against them. It became clear that the warning was more than a reprimand. It was a strategic move by the Council to restrain humanity before the planet grew too powerful. At the same time, humans outside the corridors of power were also reacting. Ordinary people, hearing of the Council's warning, had varied responses. Some panicked, imagining fleets of alien ships approaching Earth, ready to enforce the Council's rules with overwhelming force. Others were angry, feeling that humans were being judged unfairly by beings who had never truly understood life on Earth, its struggles or its achievements. Farmers, workers, engineers, and teachers all discussed the issue, sharing ideas and fears in online forums and community meetings. There was an unmistakable sense that humanity's independence was at stake, and that everyone, in some way, had a role to play in defending it. As the analysis continued, diplomats began piecing together the hidden motives behind the Council's warning. Some factions within the Council were concerned about human technology, particularly breakthroughs in propulsion, energy, and defense. They feared that humans could, intentionally or unintentionally, disrupt the balance of power in the galaxy. Others had economic concerns, worried that human trade networks would outcompete established interstellar markets. Still, others were simply distrustful, unable to comprehend the rapid pace at which humans adapted and innovated. It was a combination of fear, jealousy, and caution that had led to the Council's stern message. Despite uncovering these motives, humans did not react with anger or rash action. They understood the importance of careful planning and diplomacy. The delegations sent to the Council began drafting messages, considering every possible angle. They studied the Council's previous responses to similar situations, noting how other civilizations had attempted to comply and how that had affected their standing in the galaxy. These lessons were vital. Earth could not afford to appear weak, but it also could not risk provoking a direct confrontation. Every word, every gesture had to be calculated. Meanwhile, scientists and engineers were preparing for possible scenarios. Space stations were reinforced, communication networks hardened, and defense systems quietly upgraded. Humans had learned from history that preparation did not equal aggression. It meant survival. Technology that had been developed for exploration and trade was adapted for protection, ensuring that Earth would not be caught unprepared if the Council attempted to enforce its demands. Yet these preparations were discreet. The human delegation did not want to give the Council the impression of hostility. It was a delicate balance, demonstrating capability without provoking fear. The investigation also revealed that some humans had unknowingly interfered in interstellar matters, sending probes into regions of space considered sensitive by the Council. While these actions were not malicious, they were now seen as evidence of recklessness. Humans had been curious, adventurous, and ambitious. These traits, while essential for progress, had inadvertently drawn the Council's attention and concern. Understanding this allowed Earth's leaders to craft a response that acknowledged mistakes without admitting guilt. It was important to show responsibility while maintaining sovereignty, Across the globe, ordinary citizens began to engage with the situation in their own ways. Schools introduced discussions about interstellar law, the ethics of space exploration, and humanity's place in the galaxy. Universities hosted debates on diplomacy, strategy, and cooperation with alien civilizations. Social media became a hub for informed discussion, separating rumors from facts. This widespread engagement created a sense of shared purpose, reinforcing the idea that humanity, as a species, needed to stand together. The Council's warning, intended to intimidate, had inadvertently united people on Earth. The human delegation also reached out to neutral parties in the galaxy, species that had historically remained on the sidelines. By gathering information from multiple perspectives, humans gained insight into the Council's internal politics. They discovered allies who were sympathetic to Earth, beings who respected the planet's independence and ingenuity. These allies provided intelligence about the Council's intentions, internal disagreements, and possible paths for negotiation. For the first time, humans realized that they were not completely isolated. There were voices in the galaxy that understood and supported them. Despite the complexity of the situation, humans remained focused on one principle: careful observation. Every meeting, every signal, every communication from the Council was analyzed. Humans had learned that patience often revealed more than haste. By observing the Council's behavior, understanding its fears, and gathering evidence, Earth could prepare a strategy that was both cautious and assertive. They knew that acting too quickly or too emotionally could be catastrophic. Instead, the emphasis was on knowledge, preparation, and unity. Even as the delegation worked tirelessly, there were moments of reflection. Individuals considered what it meant to represent all of humanity in the galaxy. They thought about the generations that would follow, the future of human exploration, and the responsibility to protect Earth's sovereignty. The warning from the Council was a test not only of humanity's capabilities, but also of its values. It was a challenge to remain principled, intelligent, and courageous in the face of an overwhelming and powerful authority not in quiet corners of research facilities. Engineers ran simulations of possible outcomes. What if the Council imposed restrictions? What if it attempted to isolate Earth? Could humans negotiate, or would they need to defend themselves? These simulations were not meant to encourage conflict. They were meant to ensure preparedness. Every possibility was considered, every variable accounted for. Humanity was learning that survival in the galaxy required more than strength, it required foresight, adaptability, and wisdom. By the end of this phase of investigation, one thing was clear: the Council's warning was not arbitrary. It had a reason, and understanding that reason was critical. Humans recognized that their actions, both intentional and unintentional, had drawn scrutiny. But they also recognized that they had the capacity to respond intelligently. They could acknowledge mistakes, demonstrate responsibility, and still maintain independence. It was a delicate balance, but it was achievable through knowledge, strategy, and unity. As the days turned into weeks, the human delegation prepared their findings for Earth's leaders. Reports were compiled, strategies debated, and recommendations refined. Every citizen, in one way or another, had become part of the response effort, whether by contributing knowledge, offering ideas, or supporting research and defense projects. Humanity was learning that survival in the galaxy was a collective responsibility. The warning from the Council had sparked not fear alone, but a determination to understand, adapt, and stand together. The story of humanity's response to the Council's warning was still unfolding. While the galaxy watched silently, Earth quietly gathered its knowledge, analyzed its options, and prepared to make decisions that would shape the future. The first shock had passed, replaced by investigation, understanding, and cautious planning. Humans realized that they were no longer just inhabitants of a single planet. They were participants in a vast interstellar community. How they chose to respond would define not only their place in the galaxy, but the nature of humanity itself, and in that realization lay a quiet power. The Council might have issued a final warning, but humans had discovered something even more important. Knowledge, patience, and unity could be stronger than fear. They had begun to see that the future was not dictated solely by authority, but could be shaped by intelligence, courage, and cooperation. Earth had been warned, and humans were ready to know. The efforts of humans to investigate the Council's warning were not just about understanding, they were also about action. Earth's leaders knew that time was limited. The Council's message had been clear. Compliance was demanded, and hesitation might be interpreted as defiance. With this in mind, Earth prepared to engage directly, sending diplomats to the Council in the hope of clarifying the situation and buying more time. The delegation was carefully selected, combining experience in interstellar law, knowledge of alien cultures, and the ability to think quickly under pressure. The journey to the Council's chambers was tense. Humans traveled in ships that had been upgraded for both speed and stealth, aware that the Council would be monitoring their approach. Every movement was calculated, every transmission carefully coded. The delegation knew that even a small mistake could be interpreted as an act of aggression. Yet despite the caution, there was a quiet sense of confidence. Humans had prepared for this moment for weeks, analyzing previous interactions, anticipating objections, and rehearsing every possible scenario upon arrival. The delegation was greeted with the same grandeur and authority that had marked their previous encounters. The Council's chamber was vast, filled with beings from countless worlds, their forms strange and awe-inspiring. Some floated in the air, their shapes constantly shifting. Others were grounded, massive and heavily armored. Despite the diversity, all eyes turned to the humans. The Council was ready, and it was clear they had been expecting this meeting. The opening statements were formal, precise, and unyielding. The Council reiterated their warning, emphasizing that human behavior had been reckless and disruptive. They demanded immediate compliance with interstellar regulations, and they made it clear that failure to act would have serious consequences. The tone left little room for negotiation. Humans, however, remained calm. The delegation listened carefully, taking mental notes, noting not just the words, but the intent and emotion behind them. Once the Council finished, humans were allowed to speak. The delegation began carefully, acknowledging the Council's concerns. They admitted that humans were ambitious and occasionally acted without full awareness of the broader galaxy. But they emphasized that humanity's actions were never intended to harm or destabilize. Humans were explorers, innovators, and learners. Their curiosity and rapid progress were strengths, not threats. They sought understanding, cooperation, and peaceful coexistence. The Council listened, but did not immediately respond, creating an atmosphere of tension that pressed down on every human in the room. Days passed, and negotiations continued. The Council responded to human arguments with formal statements, often rejecting proposals or questioning Earth's intentions. At times, it felt like the discussions were going in circles, each side presenting points that the other only partially accepted. Humans found it frustrating, but they refused to react with anger. They understood that patience, clarity, and persistence were far more effective than rash words or emotional reactions. Each meeting was carefully analyzed, every response measured, and every decision debated internally before being presented. Meanwhile, back on Earth, ordinary people followed the meetings closely. News channels, secure communication networks, and educational forums kept citizens informed about the progress of diplomacy. Families discussed the stakes, educators explained the Council's structure, and communities debated the implications of compliance or defiance. People began to understand this was not a distant political issue. It was a moment that could shape the future of humanity itself. The Council's warning had made humans more aware of their own potential, their responsibilities, and the importance of unity in the face of external pressure. The delegation also discovered subtle shifts in the Council's behavior. Some alien representatives showed signs of unease, perhaps recognizing that humans were more prepared and aware than they had expected. Others became impatient, insisting that the humans comply quickly. These differences revealed internal tensions within the Council factions that disagreed about how to deal with Earth. Humans began to realize that the Council was not a monolithic entity. It was a complex organization with competing interests, fears, and agendas. This insight was crucial for the delegation, as it allowed them to tailor arguments and responses to different members of the Council. As negotiations dragged on, humans were forced to confront the reality that diplomacy alone might not be enough. The Council's demands were strict, and the timelines they imposed were short. The delegation recognized that if the Council did not budge, humanity would have to adopt other strategies. Defensive measures, careful observation, and the strengthening of Earth's technological and security capabilities became increasingly important. Humans were not seeking confrontation, but they were also not willing to surrender sovereignty or independence. Throughout this period, human communication was meticulous. Every message sent to the Council was reviewed multiple times, every action taken in space carefully documented. Analysts studied the Council's past decisions, looking for precedents, loopholes, and points of leverage. They learned to interpret subtle cues in language, movement, and expression, recognizing that the Council's intentions were sometimes revealed in what was unsaid as much as in what was spoken. Humans adapted quickly, demonstrating a capacity for strategic thinking that surprised even some veteran diplomats within the Council. In addition to official negotiations, humans also explored indirect diplomacy. They reached out to species that were neutral or sympathetic, gathering intelligence and support. These interactions provided new perspectives on the Council's internal dynamics, revealing allies who valued fairness and cooperation over dominance. Humans learned that diplomacy extended beyond the Council chamber. Influence could be built quietly, through trust, information sharing, and alliances that did not draw attention, but strengthened Earth's position in subtle ways. Despite the challenges, humans maintained focus on a single guiding principle: calm, measured responses. They understood that overreaction or emotional displays could be disastrous, giving the Council justification for stricter measures. Instead, the delegation emphasized rational arguments, historical evidence of human cooperation, and a clear demonstration of Earth's commitment to peaceful coexistence. This approach was not only strategic, but deeply human, reflecting a belief in reason, dialogue, and ethical responsibility even when confronted with immense pressure. As the weeks of diplomacy continued, humans began to see that their efforts were having an effect. Some Council members, previously rigid and uncompromising, began to acknowledge the thoughtfulness and preparation behind humanity's approach. They noted that humans were not blindly defiant, but carefully considering the consequences of every action. This recognition did not immediately change the Council's stance, but it planted seeds of doubt and reconsideration. Humanity's measured and persistent approach was slowly reshaping the Council's perception. At the same time, humans never lost sight of the potential risks. Every negotiation, every interaction, was accompanied by contingency planning. Defense systems were quietly enhanced, communication networks reinforced, and space infrastructure monitored continuously. Scientists ran simulations of possible outcomes, from the most favorable to the most extreme. Engineers worked on technologies that could protect Earth without escalating conflict, ensuring that humans were prepared for any eventuality. The delegation knew that preparation did not equal aggression. It meant ensuring survival while remaining committed to peaceful solutions. Throughout the entire process, humanity remained united. Leaders, scientists, diplomats, and ordinary citizens recognized that the Council's warning was a defining moment. It was a test of intelligence, patience, courage, and the ability to work together across boundaries. Humans began to see themselves not just as inhabitants of a single planet, but as participants in a vast, interconnected galaxy. Their actions would be watched, analyzed, and judged, and the outcome would shape the future of their species for generations. By the time the delegation prepared to conclude the third round of discussions, a clear picture had emerged. Diplomacy was difficult, slow, and at times frustrating, but it was working. Humans had established their credibility, demonstrated their understanding, and shown that they were willing to engage seriously with the Council's concerns. They had not yet resolved the underlying tension, but they had built a foundation for future negotiation, one rooted in respect, preparation, and the quiet strength of a species determined to stand on its own. As the human delegation returned to Earth, the sense of responsibility was overwhelming. Every citizen, every leader, and every scientist understood that this was only the beginning. The Council's warning had been a wake-up call, a challenge to humanity's independence and ingenuity. And while the outcome remained uncertain, humans were ready. They had proven that they could listen, learn, and respond with intelligence and integrity. The next steps would be even more critical, requiring careful planning, courage, and the steadfast belief that humanity could navigate the galaxy without surrendering its identity or freedom. In the quiet hours of Earth's night, as the delegation reported back to leaders and analysts reviewed every detail, a common understanding. As diplomacy dragged on and the Council's messages grew more urgent, Earth's leaders realized that preparation was as important as negotiation. The warning had made one thing clear: humanity could not rely solely on words to ensure safety and sovereignty. While the delegation continued discussions with the Council, Earth quietly strengthened its defenses, upgrading technologies, reinforcing space stations, and reviewing every security system. These measures were not acts of aggression. They were acts of survival. Humanity had learned through history that preparation did not provoke conflict. It prevented it. In secret command centers, engineers and strategists worked around the clock. They analyzed every potential threat scenario, imagining what might happen if the Council chose to escalate the situation. Simulation programs ran endlessly, testing defensive strategies against attacks, blockades, or interruptions of communication networks. Scientists focused on energy shields, propulsion systems, and rapid response drones that could protect Earth and its orbiting colonies. Every project was designed to ensure that humans could act, if necessary, but remain non-threatening unless forced. The world outside these centers was also changing. Citizens, informed by accurate news and government briefings, began to understand the stakes. Schools held discussions about humanity's role in the galaxy. Universities hosted lectures on interstellar law, and community forums debated ethics, strategy, and preparation. People realized that survival in the wider universe required knowledge, unity, and cooperation. Fear existed, of course, but it was accompanied by determination. Humans were beginning to see themselves not just as residents of a single planet, but as guardians of a civilization that now extended into the stars. The Council, meanwhile, detected the changes on Earth. They noticed that humans were reinforcing space infrastructure, upgrading technology, and coordinating in ways that suggested careful planning rather than panic. Some members of the Council saw this as evidence of potential aggression, while others recognized it as prudent preparation. This observation created tension within the Council itself. Factions that had demanded strict compliance were frustrated. Factions that advocated caution began to worry that forcing humanity too hard could backfire. Humans were not reacting with fear, they were reacting with logic, strategy, and unity. In response to the Council's increasing pressure, Earth's leaders initiated what they called a measured defensive stance. This involved more than just technology. Diplomatic communications were refined, alliances quietly strengthened, and contingency plans reviewed. Every department, from research labs to defense command centers, worked in coordination. Humans recognized that the galaxy was watching, and that their every action could influence not only the Council's response, but also how other species perceived humanity. It was a delicate balance. Project strength without provoking unnecessary conflict. Demonstrate capability without showing aggression. Humanity's approach was informed by centuries of history. Humans had survived wars, epidemics, and natural disasters, often relying on creativity and cooperation to overcome challenges. These lessons were applied to the interstellar situation. Strategic thinkers emphasized flexibility, anticipating that the Council's reactions might be unpredictable. They created multiple plans, each adaptable to changing circumstances. Every department, every team, understood that a misstep could have consequences far beyond the individual or even the planet. Humanity's survival now depended on careful foresight, intelligent planning, and the ability to act as one species. The delegation that had been negotiating with the Council continued to update Earth's leadership. Every detail of the discussions, every statement from the Council, and every subtle shift in behavior was analyzed. They noticed that some Council members, previously stern and inflexible, were beginning to hesitate, uncertain how to interpret humanity's actions. This was encouraging. It suggested that calm, consistent preparation and measured responses could influence even the most powerful beings. Humans realized that strength was not only in technology or numbers, but also in strategy, patience, and understanding. Communication with other species was also a critical part of Earth's approach. Humans reached out to neutral civilizations and those sympathetic to fairness and cooperation. These allies provided intelligence, helped clarify interstellar law, and offered perspectives on how the Council might react to different scenarios. By gathering this information, humans expanded their understanding of the galaxy's political landscape. They learned that the Council was not a single, monolithic authority, but a complex network of factions, each with its own fears, priorities, and strategies. This knowledge became a powerful tool for Earth's leaders. While these preparations were ongoing, everyday life on Earth continued. People adapted to the uncertainty in quiet ways. Communities emphasized resilience, families discussed plans for emergencies, and local governments coordinated infrastructure and communications. The Council's warning, though distant and abstract, had a tangible effect on human behavior. It reminded people of the importance of unity, preparation, and careful thinking. Humans were discovering that even in the face of a massive external threat, society could come together to solve problems creatively and effectively. Despite the outward calm, humans were aware of the risks. The Council had made it clear that failure to comply with its demands could result in serious consequences. Some feared isolation, while others worried about interference with technology or trade networks. Humanity had to prepare for these possibilities, even while continuing diplomatic efforts. Contingency plans included securing resources, protecting colonies in orbit and on distant planets, and ensuring that communication networks could operate independently if the Council attempted to impose restrictions. At the same time, humanity's unity became a source of strength. Scientists, engineers, diplomats, and citizens were not simply reacting to fear, they were cooperating, sharing knowledge, and building confidence in their ability to navigate uncertainty. This collective effort strengthened morale, reinforcing the idea that the survival and independence of humanity were shared responsibilities. The warning from the Council had become a catalyst for collaboration, turning anxiety into constructive action and focus. The strategic defensive stance also included ethical considerations. Humans were careful not to provoke conflict unnecessarily knowing that perception mattered as much as reality. They sought to demonstrate capability without intimidation. Defensive projects were framed as protective rather than aggressive, and communication with the galaxy emphasized transparency and responsibility. Humanity aimed to show that it could defend itself intelligently, not recklessly. This approach, combining caution with preparation, was designed to maintain credibility while avoiding unnecessary escalation. As Earth continued to strengthen its position, the Council observed closely. Members who had initially seen humanity as weak began to reassess. They noticed that humans were organized, resilient, and adaptable. Some began to worry that forcing Earth to comply might be counterproductive. Humans were not panicking. They were methodically preparing. This realization introduced doubt within the Council, undermining the certainty of those who had demanded strict enforcement. The balance of power, while not equal, was subtly shifting. Through it all, humans maintained focus on one principle: survival through intelligence and unity. Every action, from upgrading defense systems to negotiating with allies, reflected a deep understanding of the stakes. Humans were learning that survival in the galaxy required more than technology. It required foresight, cooperation, and ethical responsibility. Every citizen, whether directly involved or simply aware of the situation, contributed to this effort by being informed, engaged, and prepared. The quiet defensive preparations of Earth were complemented by subtle diplomatic efforts. Humans continued to communicate with factions within the Council, using measured arguments to clarify intentions and demonstrate responsibility. Every message was carefully reviewed, every word considered for its impact. Diplomacy was ongoing, even as preparation proceeded in parallel. Humans recognized that both elements, diplomacy and defense, were essential to survival and independence. By the end of this phase, a clear picture had emerged. Humans had strengthened their technological and strategic position, cultivated alliances, and maintained disciplined communication with the Council. They had demonstrated resilience, intelligence, and ethical responsibility. While the threat from the Council remained real, humanity was no longer a passive participant. It had become a capable, informed, and united species, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The story of this period ended with a sense of cautious optimism. Humans were prepared, vigilant, and strategic, combining knowledge, unity, and foresight to navigate a galaxy that had suddenly become uncertain. The Council's warning had not broken human spirit. It had strengthened it. Humanity had begun to demonstrate that it could protect itself intelligently, ethically, and decisively. While the galaxy watched, Earth quietly built the foundations for a future where it could survive, thrive, and remain free, no matter what the Council might demand. The day finally came when humanity had to respond to the Council's ultimatum. After weeks of observation, investigation, preparation, and careful diplomacy, Earth's leaders and delegates gathered in a secure command center to decide exactly what message would be sent. The entire planet, though unaware of every detail, felt the weight of the moment. Every citizen, every scientist, every engineer, and every diplomat had played a part in bringing humanity to this point. This was not just a response to a warning, it was a statement of identity, independence, and resolve. The message crafted by Earth's leaders was unlike any previous communication to the Council. It was short, calm, and precise. There were no threats, no emotional outbursts, and no attempts to provoke fear. Instead, it expressed a clear, unyielding stance. Humanity would not surrender its freedom, nor would it allow external authorities to dictate its destiny. The words were measured, deliberate, and carefully chosen to demonstrate intelligence, unity, and resolve. It was a cold response, not born of anger, but of clarity, calculation, and confidence. When the transmission left Earth, it was received by the Council with immediate attention. Every member paused, reading and rereading the message. For beings who were used to compliance, obedience, and fear from younger civilizations, the calm defiance was shocking. There were no threats, no provocations, yet the message carried power because it reflected understanding and resolve. Humans were not reacting out of panic. They were reacting out of knowledge, foresight, and unity. Back on Earth, the atmosphere was tense. People waited, not with fear, but with quiet anticipation. Scientists monitored communications, diplomats analyzed every potential response, and ordinary citizens speculated about what the Council's next move might be. Even in the uncertainty, there was a sense of pride. Humanity had faced countless challenges throughout history, and this was simply another test of intelligence, patience, and courage. This time, the test was not only about survival, but also about standing firm in the face of an authority that expected fear. The Council's reaction came slowly, measured, and cautious. Delegates debated behind closed chambers, analyzing Earth's message from every angle. Some members wanted immediate retaliation, insisting that humans must be punished for their defiance. Others, however, grew uneasy, recognizing that humans had demonstrated discipline, intelligence, and strategic thinking. They were not a species to be controlled easily. These debates highlighted fractures within the Council, revealing that even in a body accustomed to dominance, consensus could be fragile when confronted with a species that refused to be intimidated. In the meantime, Earth continued to strengthen its position quietly. Preparations were ongoing, but they were discreet. Humans understood that actions could be misinterpreted as aggression if made too public. Engineers and scientists continued developing technologies that could protect the planet and its colonies. Space stations were upgraded, energy shields reinforced, and communication networks hardened. Contingency plans were refined for every possible scenario, from isolation and trade restrictions to more extreme measures. The approach was careful, strategic, and non-provocative. Across the world, ordinary humans contributed in their own ways. Communities discussed contingency plans. Schools taught students about diplomacy, ethics, and strategy, and research centers ran simulations to support both defense and peaceful negotiation. There was a sense that the planet was working together, not just as individuals, but as a species united by purpose. The Council's warning, intended to intimidate, had instead fostered collaboration, focus, and resilience. Humanity was discovering the strength that comes from unity and preparation. The cold response, while lacking emotion or threat, carried weight because it reflected understanding. Humans had studied the Council's laws, its past decisions, and the behavior of its delegates. Every point in the message addressed real concerns without giving in to fear. The delegation emphasized that humanity valued cooperation and peace, but it would not compromise its freedom or self-determination. This approach was strategic. It demonstrated capability, intelligence, and ethical responsibility simultaneously. Inside the Council, tensions grew. Some delegates realized that humans were not naive, not reckless, and not afraid. They had expected fear, panic, or submissiveness, but received none. Instead, humanity's calm defiance created doubt. Could a species so young and seemingly untested navigate the galaxy on its own terms? Were the Council's assumptions about human behavior accurate? These questions caused rifts and debates, leaving the Council uncertain about the next course of action. Humans had, through a single measured response, altered the perception of an entire interstellar authority. Humanity's approach was deliberate and patient. There was no rush to escalate, no desire for confrontation, yet every action was intentional. Diplomatic channels remained open, alliances strengthened, and intelligence gathering continued. Humans understood that survival depended on a combination of readiness and restraint. They were prepared to defend themselves, but they preferred strategy, reasoning, and ethical action over reckless aggression. This balance was uniquely human, reflecting both intelligence and moral judgment. Meanwhile, ordinary life on Earth carried on under the shadow of interstellar tension. People adapted to the knowledge that the galaxy was watching. Communities fostered education and resilience. Families discussed ethics, strategy, and science as part of everyday conversation. Citizens participated indirectly in humanity's preparation by being informed, vigilant, and responsible. In this way, the cold response to the Council's warning was more than just a diplomatic act. It became a defining moment for humanity itself, shaping identity, unity, and shared purpose. The cold response also served as a message to potential allies across the galaxy. Humans were no longer passive participants. They were an intelligent, capable, and unified species. Allies and neutral parties recognized this strength, offering subtle support or sharing intelligence that could help maintain Earth's independence. Humanity was beginning to build a network of understanding and trust, reinforcing the notion that survival and cooperation were possible even in a galaxy dominated by powerful authorities. Throughout the entire period, humans remained focused on ethics. Preparation and defensive measures were carefully framed as protection, not provocation. Every communication, every technology upgrade, every alliance was approached with thoughtfulness. Humans recognized that reputation mattered as much as capability. The Council might have expected fear, but humans had demonstrated reasoning, strategic foresight, and calm judgment. Their measured response became a template for how civilizations could assert independence without escalating conflict unnecessarily. As time passed, it became evident that the Council's perception of humanity was shifting. The initial assumption that humans could be easily intimidated was no longer valid. Humans had shown patience, intelligence, and preparedness. They had acknowledged potential mistakes, addressed concerns with clarity, and demonstrated that they were capable of standing firm while remaining rational and ethical. This realization created uncertainty in the Council, forcing them to reconsider their assumptions and strategies. For Earth, the impact was profound. The cold response had united people across the planet in a way that no threat could. Citizens understood that survival in the galaxy depended not on panic, but on knowledge, preparation, and cooperation. The message sent to the Council had been more than words. It had been a demonstration of humanity's identity, capabilities, and values. It reflected not only strength, but also wisdom, ethics, and strategic thought. By the end of this stage, humans had achieved something remarkable. They had responded to a powerful authority without fear, without rash action, and without surrendering their principles. The galaxy had taken notice. Allies were beginning to see humanity as a reliable, capable species. Even some factions within the Council were beginning to reconsider their approach. Humanity had transformed from a species that could be dismissed into one that had to be reckoned with. The cold response also marked a turning point in human self-perception. People began to see themselves not just as inhabitants of a single planet, but as active participants in the galaxy's complex political and strategic landscape. The Council's warning, intended to enforce submission, had instead inspired a demonstration of intelligence, patience, and unity that no one could ignore. Humans were discovering that their strength lay not only in technology or numbers, but in their capacity to act ethically, strategically, and collectively. As Earth continued to monitor the Council's reaction, the world maintained vigilance. The defensive stance remained, intelligence continued to be gathered, and diplomacy persisted. Humans knew that this was not the end of the challenge. The Council's power was vast, and the galaxy remained full of uncertainties. Yet, humanity had taken its first step in defining its own destiny. By responding with calm, precision, and ethical strength, humans had sent a clear signal. They would not be intimidated, controlled, or underestimated. In this moment, Earth's leaders, diplomats, scientists, and citizens understood the power of measured action. They had learned that fear could be transformed into strategy, uncertainty into knowledge, and threats into opportunities for unity. The Council's silence after receiving humanity's cold response was long and deliberate. On Earth, people waited anxiously, though there was a sense of quiet pride. Humanity had spoken clearly, calmly, and firmly, and the world had demonstrated a unity it had never known before. Scientists, engineers, and diplomats continued to monitor signals from deep space, ready for any sudden developments. Every citizen, in some way, felt the tension, the hope, and the responsibility of being part of a planet that had chosen to stand together. Finally, the Council responded. Their message was measured, acknowledging that humanity had not acted recklessly, and that their response reflected careful thought, preparation, and strategy. For the first time, the Council did not demand immediate compliance or issue threats. Instead, they expressed cautious respect, recognizing that humans were capable of independent decision-making. It was not a concession, but it was an acknowledgement. Earth was no longer a species to be underestimated. The reaction within the Council itself was complicated. Some members still harbored fear and suspicion, believing that humanity's rapid progress could pose a future threat. Others, however, began to advocate for engagement, seeing the potential benefits of an independent, rational, and ethical human civilization. The divisions that had been hinted at earlier became more apparent. Humans, through careful observation, diplomacy, and measured action, had managed to exploit these differences without provoking conflict. Their strategy was working slowly, cautiously, and effectively. Back on Earth, the news of the Council's acknowledgement was met with relief, but there was no celebration without caution. Humanity understood that this was not the end of challenges, but a milestone in a longer journey. People reflected on the weeks and months of preparation, observation, and careful negotiation. They realized that survival in the galaxy required intelligence, patience, and ethical action more than aggression or fear. Citizens felt pride in being part of a species that could face a powerful authority and respond with strategy, unity, and calm resolve. The human delegation, still in close communication with the Council, continued to emphasize dialogue, understanding, and mutual respect. They reinforced the message that humanity sought peaceful coexistence, but would not compromise its freedom. These communications were deliberate, precise, and carefully monitored for tone, meaning, and potential misinterpretation. Humans were learning that diplomacy was not about words alone. It was about consistency, patience, and the demonstration of capability without provocation. Meanwhile, Earth's preparations continued. The defensive stance remained active, though no immediate threat was detected. Engineers upgraded energy shields, enhanced communication networks, and maintained the readiness of orbital stations and colonies. Scientists explored new technologies that could improve both exploration and protection, ensuring that humanity would be prepared for any eventuality. This dual focus on diplomacy and defense became a hallmark of Earth's strategy, reflecting wisdom, caution, and foresight. Across the planet, citizens remained engaged. Communities discussed interstellar law, ethics, and strategy. Schools and universities continued to educate students about humanity's place in the galaxy, teaching lessons that combined science, diplomacy, and moral responsibility. Social networks became hubs for informed discussion, replacing panic and rumor with knowledge and constructive debate. Humans were learning that survival in the galaxy was not only about technology or defense, but about culture, unity, and the shared values that guided decision-making. The Council's acknowledgement also influenced humanity's perception of itself. People realized that they were capable of strategic thought, collective action, and ethical decision-making on a scale previously unimaginable. This understanding strengthened national and global unity. Humanity had faced a test unlike any before, and while the outcome was still uncertain, The process had proven the species' resilience, intelligence, and moral strength. The cold response had done more than communicate a position. It had defined humanity's identity in the galaxy. At the same time, humans were aware of ongoing challenges. The galaxy remained vast, complex, and filled with unknown threats. Other species might react differently to humanity's rise. Factions within the Council could shift, and unforeseen events might occur. Yet, Earth's leaders knew that they had established a framework for responding to these challenges. Careful observation, strategic preparation, ethical action, and unity. These principles would guide humanity in the years to come, ensuring that the planet could navigate the galaxy while maintaining its independence and values. Humanity's success also relied on indirect strategies. Earth maintained communication with neutral or sympathetic species, building a network of information, support, and collaboration. These relationships provided insight into the Council's internal dynamics and offered potential allies should future conflicts arise. Humans recognized that the galaxy was interconnected and that survival depended not only on strength, but on understanding, trust, and diplomacy. By cultivating these connections, Earth had strengthened its position without provoking hostility. Through all these efforts, humans remained committed to ethical behavior. Preparation and defense were carefully framed as protective measures rather than aggressive ones. Every action reflected responsibility, intelligence, and foresight. Humanity had demonstrated that it could act decisively without fear, but also without recklessness. This balance of strength, morality, and strategy became the defining characteristic of the species in the eyes of both allies and the Council. Acknowledgement from the Council marked a turning point. Humanity was no longer perceived as weak, naive, or easily intimidated. The species had demonstrated the capacity for strategic thinking, patience, and ethical decision-making. Even factions within the Council that had been skeptical or hostile had to reconsider their assumptions. Humanity had established credibility, not through aggression or bluster, but through preparation, intelligence, and unity. As time passed, the human delegation continued to refine strategies for engagement with the Council. Lessons learned from this experience were documented, studied, and shared with scientists, strategists, and citizens alike. Humans recognized that the galaxy was a complex and dynamic environment, and that ongoing observation, communication, and preparation were essential. They also understood that the process of asserting independence, building alliances, and maintaining security was ongoing and required constant attention. The cold response had also reshaped humanity's self-perception. People now saw themselves not just as inhabitants of a planet, but as active participants in the galaxy. They understood the power of strategic, calm, and ethical action. The Council's warning, intended to intimidate, had instead catalyzed a transformation. Humanity had learned that knowledge, unity, and foresight could rival fear and authority, allowing the species to navigate challenges while maintaining its values and freedom. Citizens continued to participate in the effort indirectly. Schools, universities, and public forums emphasized ethics, strategy, and diplomacy. Communities shared information and strategies, encouraging collective thinking and problem-solving. Humanity had transformed a moment of potential fear into an opportunity for growth, knowledge, and unity. People felt empowered, recognizing that their collective efforts contributed to the survival and success of the species. By the conclusion of this stage, humanity had achieved something remarkable. The cold response had sent a clear signal to the Council. Humans were intelligent, capable, unified, and independent. They had not reacted with panic or aggression, but with strategy, preparation, and ethical judgment. The galaxy had observed this behavior, and humanity had redefined itself in the eyes of powerful authorities. Allies, neutral parties, And even some council factions now recognized that Earth could not be underestimated. The final lesson of this journey was profound. Survival and success in the galaxy depended not on fear or submission, but on intelligence, unity, patience, and ethical action. Humans had demonstrated that a species could face a powerful authority and respond calmly, strategically, and firmly while maintaining its values. The Council's warning had not broken human spirit, it had strengthened it. Earth had proven that it could navigate the galaxy with knowledge, foresight, and moral integrity. As humanity looked to the future, the focus remained on preparation, diplomacy, and unity. The galaxy was vast and filled with unknown challenges, but humans had learned the principles necessary to face them: knowledge, strategy, ethics, and collective strength. Citizens, scientists, engineers, and leaders all shared the responsibility of ensuring survival while upholding freedom and moral responsibility. The story of the cold response to the Council's warning became a defining moment in human history, shaping identity, culture, and the approach to the universe itself. In the end, humanity had not just survived, it had asserted its independence, established its credibility, and demonstrated the power of strategy, ethics, and unity. The Council's warning, once intended to intimidate, had instead inspired a species to rise to its full potential. Humans had shown the galaxy that they were not to be controlled, feared, or underestimated. They had responded calmly, firmly, and wisely, leaving a legacy that would guide future Jay.